Hi, I'm Scott Graffius, and this is But First the Team. A new report from the DevOps Institute I just read the other day had a very interesting quote that I wanted to share and lead this talk with, and it is this. A DevOps leader must be skilled in empowering and developing others and be able to go beyond oneself to help the group. It ties in quite well with this talk, which is all about team leadership and development, and that's why I wanted to share it. I did want to mention also upfront that for content accessibility purposes, this presentation deliberately uses relatively large size fonts and high contrast elements such as black text on a white background and other similar cases, and vibrant custom visuals. I'll also be describing the on-screen content. In just a few cases, it'll be verbatim, in most cases not. So we're off. Want great DevOps and tech projects? Well, who doesn't? Among other things, it takes a great team. So that's where the phases of team development tool comes in. It's a framework which you can leverage to help your teams go farther faster. So if you're a leader, a DevOps leader, or aspiring to be one, and I trust that's the case with your attendance at this DevOps Pro Europe 2021 conference, or you're a member of a team, or you might be in one in the future, DevOps team or otherwise, that covers pretty much everyone else, or you're just looking to develop your related skills, this talk, which is based on Dr. Bruce Tuckman's model, but with a totally fresh angle, 0% theory, 100% practical information you can use. We'll give you a framework with actionable tips for working in and leading teams successfully. So here are the objectives for this talk. After completing the session, you'll understand the 5 phases of team development. So if you're already familiar with them, this will be a refresher. Otherwise, this will be new. The characteristics of each phase, and then most importantly, the usable strategies for navigating the phases from start to finish. Here's the agenda, how the talk is structured. First is the introduction, objectives, and agenda, and we're almost done with that. A little bit of about information in under a minute. The main attraction is the 5 phases of team development, a quick wrap up, followed by a digital download and Q&A and thank you. And speaking of which, I'll be handling your questions. I do look forward to your feedback and answering any questions you have. I'll be handling that via chat functionality after the presentation. So we have some time reserved after the presentation to handle just that. Here's some information about me. I'm an Agile project management practitioner, consultant, author, and speaker. And I'm the founder and CEO of Exceptional PPM and PMO Solutions. We help client organizations strengthen their capabilities so that they can achieve their objectives, and we have a delighted client guarantee trademark. Enough of that. I have 8 professional credentials. The first 5 shown on screen are Agile related, and followed by the project management professional, ITIL, and Lean Six Sigma. And in terms of background, my experience is pretty diverse. As shown here, everything from entertainment, consumer products, government, media, and much more. And I'm honored that content from my books, which are 2, my workshops, talks, and other content have been featured and used by a variety of sources. I have just a visual here with a few examples. I'll list just of some of them here. Computer Weekly, Techstars, Gartner, Cisco, Oracle, Ford, Microsoft, Sweden's Innovation Management, the New Zealand government, and many more. And so here we are, onto the main attraction, the 5 phases of team development. So Dr. Bruce Tuckman, who received his PhD in psychology from Princeton, did extensive research on what was originally called team dynamics or group dynamics, and since called team development or group development. So those 2 terms for purposes of this topic are all sort of used interchangeably. Did want to mention that. And he published his model way back in '65. So why the heck are we talking about something from '65? Well, because it's still relevant and beneficial today. Many examples of that coming up. This talk draws on my own firsthand real world experience. Again, no theory here. And it is supported by additional research and recommendations. There have been thousands of studies done since Dr. Tuckman released his model in '65 that validate and reaffirm its value and importance and relevance. Here are 9 that I picked out that are for a sense of diversity here. I will list them quite quickly. Microsoft, IEEE, Harvard Business Review, Forbes, CIO, Fast Company, MIT, The Next Web, IBM, to name a few, have advocated this model. The one thing I will mention is in many papers, while they are extremely complementary of the model, they fall short of providing specific, proven things that could be done to exercise the model or to use the model in a real world situation. That's where this talk is different. So I've looked at not only these 9, 21 additional for a total of 30 are in the digital download. So if you're interested, the details behind these 9 examples, 21 additional are in the digital download along with other content, which I'll show you at the end of this talk. I could have had the bibliography be hundreds or thousands, but I had to put a line somewhere, so I said 30. And so I did the research by looking at the literature in terms of what are the proven strategies that can be employed that work in helping folks move and apply this team in a beneficial fashion. And I put them in plain language terms. And that's what sets this talk apart. So to underscore the relevance and value of the model, because again, it was introduced in 1965, the sources I just showed you were all published in the last 10 years. Furthermore, many of them were published in the last year. So enough of that. Talking about models, usually models are put into some sort of a visual context that can be kind of navigated and explored. And I think there's good reason for that. And I found that for this topic, that was the right approach here as well. So I created a custom visual to help us navigate and explore the phases of team development. So at least for me, at least for this talk, clip art just does not work. No clip art, no stock photos, and definitely no generic content. Sorry, it does not work here for me, for this talk at least. So here's the custom visual of the phases of team development. Now, as mentioned earlier, I have, for content accessibility purposes, have the fonts highly readable, so large size fonts, for example. Obviously, this one does not apply, but in a moment or so, we will be zooming in on aspects of this and elaborating on this visual here. So the text will be in a readable fashion in a moment. But before that, I wanted to see with this one here, just to give you the overview of this model here. So what we have up top is the graph, and you have a forming, storming, norming, performing, and journeying going from left to right. And you see the performance level of the different phases. For example, the lowest is in storming and the highest is in performing, for example. And then below those headers, you have the first row are the characteristics. These are the things that are seen in most teams. So if you're not familiar with this model, or you like a sort of a reference, you can look at this to help diagnose, use it as a diagnostic to determine overall where the team is in these 5 phases. So those are the characteristics. Then below that, once you know where the team is, if it isn't apparent, there are the proven strategies. These are the things that can be employed to help the team grow, advance, improve, and that means move from left to right, move to the higher level of performance. So this is obviously a DevOps conference, and this model is agnostic in the following regards. It can apply to all teams or groups, as Tuckman used those terms interchangeably for purposes of this discussion. And I do realize that projects, teams are typically very different from DevOps organizations, but this model applies to all scenarios. I'll give examples because in your environment, for example, maybe folks on the DevOps team never work on a project per se, not a official separate project. Maybe in your organization, somebody from DevOps is a team member on a project from beginning to end, and then they go back to the organization, to the DevOps organization, or they're doing both at the same time. Well, the thing is, there's a variety of different incarnations of what DevOps implementations. And so what I'll be doing is I'll be providing examples that range projects, DevOps organizations, and sort of hybrid between those two. But this model applies to all situations. So Dr. Tuckman has said, and the research sense has validated, that these phases are normal, healthy, and essential for the team to grow, advance, and move forward in terms of their performance. I'll give you a quick example of how DevOps and projects apply but are different. So a project having a discrete start and an end, whereas DevOps is, forgive my oversimplification, but is continuous. But in terms of a start and an end, think about this in your DevOps organization. I don't know if you can relate to this or not, but I've worked with DevOps teams, and I've worked on project teams, and I've worked on hybrid situations. So how about if the tool set changes? I mean, a dramatic change. What if the team has been split and there's two separate DevOps groups instead of one? I've seen this happen. It may not happen in your environment, but it has happened. Or there's a merge. Two separate DevOps groups become one DevOps group. Or people promoted, or people retire, or people are on a leave of absence, or whatever. So things can happen to a DevOps organization like a project where there is a change and the team has effectively gone back to the beginning in terms of forming, meaning they have new staff or a new tool or some dramatic change that can trigger going back to forming. In the case of a project, it is a new project and it's the beginning. That would be forming. And then a journey would be analogous to the closeout of the project. So anyways, this applies to all situations, scenarios. I wanted to mention that. I hope that's helpful. So we'll be looking at the phases in detail in just a moment. But along with that visual, I wanted a visual of the team to accompany that phases of team development. And again, Tuckman's model was introduced in '65. So was there anything that I could leverage that made sense and resonated from '65 that would be representation of a team? I didn't find anything that really worked well in '65 or '66 or '67 or '68. But in 1969, I found something. And I don't know if there are any Lego fans, but this is a custom visual, by the way. So this is a visual of the team. My attitude with this is that while the subject matter is quite serious in terms of its importance and value, there's no reason to not interject some level of fun. And this is how I manifest doing so. I'm a real partier, as you can tell. So this is this visual of the team. Again, a custom visual. And P.S., these figures are darn expensive. I had no idea. And now the 5 phases of team development. First up is forming, the first phase out of 5. And zooming in on it, here's a visual of the team. In the case of a project, it is people coming together for a unique endeavor. Maybe there are folks who have all worked together before, they've never worked together before, or a mix. In the case of DevOps, it's because somebody new has joined the team, or there's a change in the tool sets, or some other trigger that has been a notable change or a significant impact on the organization in terms of it doing something differently that would be bringing it to this phase 1. And so that's the visual to go along with the characteristics of the team. And things are new. And so with that comes DevOps or project or either situation, sort of a sense of eagerness, and they're socializing and tone is polite. People are sticking to safe topics, but no matter how much information is shared or known, this one applies, I think, maybe a little bit more to projects probably than DevOps, but I could see how it works in DevOps as well. But no matter how much information is shared or known up front, there's still a sense of anxiety or questioning, how am I going to fit in? How am I going to contribute to the goal of this DevOps group, or the objectives of the vision of the DevOps group, or this unique project? So that's quite normal. So it's important to recognize that as a current or a future leader in your organization. And then importantly, here are the strategies to help the team grow and advance. So this team does not have to be a long-lived phase. It can be quite short. Taking the lead. And so the literature is quite clear about this, that this person, they're being quite agnostic about it. What I mean by that is, it can be anybody. It can be, in the case of a project manager or a scrum master. In the case of a DevOps organization, it could be a DevOps manager or a lead, or whatever titles apply to your organization. Or it can even be somebody who's outside the direct team, like an executive sponsor or a CTO or somebody like that. Well, somebody is taking the lead, being very visible at this early point, facilitating introductions. No matter what, the literature is clear that when you're doing something new, even if you're working with people who you worked with before, but if there are some new people there, it can be quite helpful to do introductions. It can be a brief exercise. It doesn't have to be a long exercise. It could be done over Zoom, during COVID. It could be, in a minute, tell me something about yourself and give us some ideas about that, some guide rails on that. And some organizations do icebreakers. So the point of the literature is, that I wanted to convey, is that facilitating introductions, icebreakers, what have you, are always helpful. The value goes up considerably with the number of new people in the team, or the change that the organization, for example, the DevOps organization, is being asked to implement. So like a new tool set or something like that. So something to consider. Providing the big picture, the idea here is, like, I may have spoken about this a little bit a moment ago, but whatever's known about the project or the vision, or what's the team is being asked to do that's different, should be shared up front. It's perfectly normal, especially in the case of projects, to not know everything at the very beginning. And so progressive elaboration is typical and is perfectly acceptable. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that, but whatever is known, to share that. In the case of a project, I'll give you an example that is quite straightforward, I believe. And that would be that, perhaps not in an agile environment, but let's say at your company, there's some sort of a top-down date, like this needs to be deployed by March 1st. Well, if that's true, or something like that, it's better to know about it now than a month from now, right? You get the idea here, I hope. And that's really also related to success criteria. Whatever is the success criteria for the DevOps group or the project or whatever it is the folks are working on, should be shared up front. Now, ensuring response times are quick, could apply, and it really does, to all phases. But these are the things that are particularly valuable during the forming phase. That's why it's listed here. So when someone has a question or an issue, a quick response time is very beneficial and helping the team move on forward. And so going on, speaking of which, on to the next phase, is storming phase. This can be a short-lived phase, although I'm getting a little ahead of myself, I suppose. But at a conference I spoke at a few months ago, an attendee confided publicly in chat that she was on a team, and based on this description, they never left storming. They were storming the entire time. And she thought that it would be beneficial to have had this model ahead of time, so that they can help move into the norming and performing phases and got out of storming. But I say that because if you look at the graph above, there is a level of performance. It isn't zero during the storming phase. It's covered a little bit by that yellow bar around storming, but there is a level of performance. It's just not the highest level of performance by far. Performing is the highest level of performance. So these phases can be short and they can be long-lived. They're typically short though, forming and storming. So enough of that. Here we're going to go and see the visual here. We have very different visual with storming, and here the visual really goes along with these characteristics of it's entirely possible that there is some level of resistance, and it may not be overt and obvious, but that might be translated into a lack of participation or maybe not 100% commitment, if you will. This all can be based possibly on differences of opinions and feelings and such. And there can also be in some organizations, according to the literature, it's quite clear on this, regardless of official titles, in some teams there can be sort of jockeying for position. So somebody wants to be the big contributor. I mean, nobody really says that, and maybe they don't even consciously think that, but that can happen during the storming phase. So compared with the other phases, this can be high emotions, can be exhibited during the storming phase. But the good news is here are the strategies to help the team grow and advance. Requesting and encouraging feedback may sound quite obvious and applicable to all phases. And I would, if you're thinking that, I would agree with you. Here's what it means here in this case. This is particularly important for storming. Request and encouraging feedback, the details from the literature is how it's delivered and the frequency of the delivery would be the two main things to consider. Even during COVID, it can be done well. For example, it's not a one-off thing where somebody says, if you have a problem, let me know. That's not at all what we're talking about here. We're talking about a situation where somebody says something like, in an email, in a Zoom call, what have you, or in person if it's pre or post-COVID, something like, any questions or issues or feedback you have at any time, big or small, please let me know. Pop in my office, send me an email, send me a message, give a bunch of examples of how they can reach out to you. Make it easy and frictionless as possible. And the reason for that is, it might sound quite obvious, but common sense isn't always common practice. The second bullet point here is, big onerous issues and problems are typically sort of self-revealing. They become obvious and communicated within the team, project team or DevOps organization, typically. It's these smaller, more insidious issues that may or may not derail a project in total, but in aggregate, the cumulative effect of a variety of these smaller issues or problems non-addressed can take a quite negative toll on the team and their performance. So it's by requesting encouraging feedback and being consistent and repeated in doing so. For example, it's again not mentioned just once. Maybe it's mentioned each team meeting or in an email. It's sort of in the footer or in the header of each email. However it is you communicate status in your DevOps or your project organization is where it should be. And I will jump down to the last bullet point here because of our time. Trust. How do you build trust? Well, the literature is very clear, at least as it applies to this model. It's by honoring commitments. That's how you build trust. And that's how you get out of storming. I'll give you an example. You don't have to, this one you may not relate to directly, but it's something I got off the top of my head here. And that is a team, it's an agile organization, and whether it's Kanban or Scrum or whatever, and there's a daily stand-up or a daily team meeting from 9 to 9:15 every workday, where each individual provides a quick update, a minute or less, say, maybe 2 minutes or less, about what they've done since the last team meeting, what they're going to do in the new business day, and any issues or impediments that haven't already been surfaced. Those are the typical structure. It can be whatever format you like, right? That's the more typical one. And so things happen, life happens, things happen, and so maybe a meeting or two will get canceled. But picture your situation, picture a scenario where you're in a new DevOps organization or in a new project, and that's part of the structure of the team is you're going to do these daily 9 to 9:15 meetings, and 4 of them get canceled in a row. Yeah, well, good luck with that. I mean, that's it's the opposite of building trust, and it will make it much more difficult to get out of storming or to get totally out of storming phase by not honoring commitments. So honoring I mean, you can change your mind, right? You can say, well, we're not going to be able to do them every day now. We're going to do them once a week or whatever. That's fine, but you need to honor your commitments. I cannot overemphasize that the literature is crystal clear that by doing so, you will build trust and do so quickly and highly effectively and move out of storming very, very fast into norming, which is phase 3 out of 5, the second highest level in terms of performance. In here, we have a very different visual that speaks to, I believe, the last bullet point here in the list of characteristics. Yeah, developing cohesion. So it's not a hierarchy, it's just a visual showing connections between the team members compared to other visuals that you saw with the earlier phases. So that's what the visual is communicating, or I'm attempting to communicate with that visual. The purpose and goals compared to earlier are well understood, which translates into higher confidence and commitment. Team members are engaged and supportive. And if there was anxiety earlier, which is normal, especially during the storming phase, it is lowered or eliminated during the norming phase. And again, it bears repeating, developing cohesion. So the team is the second highest level of performance. So here are the things that can be done to help the team grow and advance, which means, in this case, move on to performing, the highest level of performance. Recognizing the individual and team efforts, whether it's DevOps or a project team. Giving learning opportunities and feedback. And here, compared with earlier, where somebody was very directive, somebody being a project manager, a scrum master, a DevOps lead, whoever that person was. Here, the context is they're at the second highest level of performance. They're just about to move into performing. They're nearly there. And so it's more, you're stepping back and you, the project manager, the scrum master, whoever that person is, only gets involved as necessary, right? That might be obvious, but I wanted to share that. And that brings us to performing. The highest level of performance, phase 4 out of 5. And here, a very different visual. And this one is the last bullet point of the visual showing the demonstration of interdependence, all the connections with the different team members, and self-management, also called self-organization. So here, during performing, typically you're seeing the highest level of performance is what it is, and typically seeing high motivation, trust, and empathy. If there are questions or concerns, usually the individuals defer to the team's larger, greater needs. As sort of alluded earlier, the deliverables are being produced and they're consistent and at the highest level of performance. And it bears repeating, interdependence and self-management or self-organization is what is occurring here. So to help the team grow and advance, this is the highest level of performance, but this is an active phase. It's not done yet. So this is about keeping the momentum going with these strategies. So guiding from the side or minimal intervention, celebrating successes, encouraging collective decision-making and problem-solving. And that last bullet point is probably being already exhibited by the team. If so, they're reinforced. If not, they're encouraged to do so. And that brings us to the 5th out of the 5 phases, adjourning. So a very different visual here, sort of the flip side of forming. Here is, in the case of a project, the project is done. In the case of DevOps, the example here that I think applies to most DevOps organizations, although they're all unique. So I don't know if you'll be able to relate to this one exactly, but it would be that there's some sort of Even though DevOps is continuous, meaning it doesn't end, sort of my simplified definition, if you will, there can be breaks for planning and strategic and reviews. And so whether it's a scheduled meeting or an impromptu meeting, one organization I was at has a formal review monthly. Some do that at least annually, minimally, but usually it's weekly or it's monthly. So here is sort of a chance to sit down and take stock of the performance. In the case of DevOps, in the case of a project, the project is done. Okay, so here we have the characteristics of the team. I'm just moving fast because of our limited time here. So in 1965, Dr. Tuckman introduced 4 phases: forming, storming, norming, performing, 4 phases. But because adjourning is so important, he personally updated his own model in 1977 to include adjourning. So if you were to Google Bruce Tuckman or some of these key terms that have been talked about, you will see a lot of results, not necessarily the majority, but you'll see a lot of results that talk about the 4 phases. So because Dr. Tuckman updated his own model to include adjourning as the 5th phase, there are 5 phases. I would think everybody would be on board because we're talking about 1977. But anyways, if anyone mentions 4 phases, now you know the context for that. But there are 5 phases, 5. So this phase is also called transitioning or mourning phase. This surprised me. And I don't know if it'll surprise you or not, but I'll tell you what that is. The literature is quite clear that picture this opportunity where the DevOps organization is taking stock of its performance, its successes, and what's gone great. Or the project that this team has worked on is now done. And so there's sort of a celebration. At the same time, sadness can occur. And it's important as a DevOps leader or a future leader to understand that it's normal. And the context for that is people are, in the case of a project at least, the project is done and people are returning to something else. Their regular role in the organization or another project. Anyways, it's done, and sadness can be exhibited amongst simultaneous celebration and positive feelings. So anyways, that surprised me. I did want to share that with you, and that's why that's in the list here, because it's in the literature. And recognizing team and individual efforts, disbanding is what's happening. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So these are strategies to help the individuals, the team, and the company grow, if I had to expand that title. So what I mean by that is recognizing change and giving an opportunity for feedback, lessons learned, post-project review, post-mortem. Doesn't matter what the title is or what the label is, but you're taking stock of what's gone well, what were the problems, and what would you change in the case of a project. And in the case of DevOps, maybe you have different questions to ask. The questions can be unique. They don't have to be what I just mentioned. Those are typical ones, so that's why I listed that. So giving an opportunity for feedback, both at the individual, the team level, so that the company is in a competitive advantage to take in that information and incorporate it so that going forward for similar projects or work, they have addressed issues or impediments that have gotten in the way of the productivity of the team. And so they'll do even better next time. So one thing that is worth noting here is the last bullet point is celebrating the team's accomplishments. Granted, in a COVID Zoom scenario, it is probably quite different than in pre-COVID or post-COVID, but it can still be done and is important. For example, some companies will have a Zoom call headed up by the head of the CEO or the president or the chairman or some high-ranking individual in the organization to thank the team for their work and their contribution. And there may be some sort of so during COVID, I worked on one team, and recognizing that team members worked around the world and that the company couldn't do something which seemed like a good idea, like shipping, food for a party to individuals around the world. It was too complicated. So they provided American Express gift cards, $100, and then for people to spend on, on a meal or a celebration that could be. And again, because we have different time zones, everybody can't necessarily eat at the same time. But if you wanted to have that during the meeting, you're allowed to enjoy your redemption of your American Express gift card and a meal during this meeting. It was the one meeting where you were encouraged and allowed to do things like eat while the meeting was going on. So anyways, there are things that can be done. It's probably a little trickier during COVID than pre or post COVID, but things can be done to celebrate the team's accomplishments. Here's something else that I found interesting that you may find interesting or not, but I wanted to share. Speaking of celebrations, celebrations are certainly for the individuals on the team and the team. Here's something that the literature is clear about that I found shocking. It's almost as important for people that had nothing to do with the project. For example, someone who's not even in the DevOps team or in the project that had completed its work. The reason for that is that they are aware of and they can see how the company appreciates and recognizes the hard work and achievement of individuals. And it's made abundantly clear, again, to individuals, including those who had nothing to do with the DevOps organization or the project, that the company appreciates hard work. I guess I already said that. Anyways, it bears repeating. So those were the highlights, because of our limited time, of the 5 phases of team development. The direction is normally from left to right, forming, storming, norming, performing. The direction can sometimes, albeit rare, go from the other direction. And an example of that would be, let's say you have a DevOps organization and everything's working along perfectly or nearly perfectly, and you're in the performing phase, and 2 or 3 people left the organization, and because they promoted or they retired or whatever the reasons were, and those new people, those slots need to be replaced. Well, you are probably, by the behaviors that are exhibited when these new folks join the team, back in the forming phase. It doesn't mean it has to be a long phase in terms of time or storming for that matter. But and it's not a conscious decision. It's not like, well, we lost 3 people, therefore we're automatically informing. It really depends on how the team. So if you have planned changes to the team and you're able to acclimate or onboard through using it sort of a scenario B, you're able to acclimate, hire on 3 new people and acclimate them on board before these 3 existing people have left. Perhaps the team overall maintains the performing phase, as evidenced by the diagnostic criteria or the characteristics of the performing phase. So these would be examples of what are possible in terms of the team moving in the opposite direction. The good news is, by understanding the phase, you can apply the proven strategies that get the team back on track. So here's a quick wrap up. Forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning are all necessary and inevitable, according to Dr. Tuckman and all the follow-on research, to grow and deliver results. This talk talked about the 5 phases of team development, described the characteristics of each one, and gave you the usable strategies for navigating them from start to finish. So I put together a digital download takeaway if you're interested. It's a high-resolution 2-page PDF. The first is the bibliography, which have the 9 examples I showed you earlier and 21 additional. And then the second page of this high-resolution PDF is the main visual that we were navigating during this talk. So if you're interested, I put that together for you for attending this talk. It's at bit.ly/PDF-7. And because that short URL is also on the last slide, I'm going to move forward and say thank you to the conference for inviting me to talk. Thank you to the sponsors for supporting the conference, and then thank you for attending, because without all three, this talk would not be possible. So I am greatly appreciative of the organizers, the sponsors, and you attending this talk. That's me with my COVID hair. And I hope that you're able to use these proven strategies to help your teams go farther, faster. And then again, here's the URL. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of being asked for personal information in order to get something when it isn't absolutely necessary, the personal information that is. So with this, if you just type in bit.ly/PDF-7, it is a high resolution PDF, so it may take a moment or two to load, but then once it's there, you can save it to your computer. Again, it's a high resolution 2-page PDF. And however, I would love to have you provide feedback. Feedback is not limited to Teams. And so I would love to hear from you about what you liked so that I can understand, and what maybe you would prefer to have changed so that I can understand how to improve this talk going forward. This optional survey at bit.ly/YES7 is, I think it's your name and what did you think, and it's optional to put your email address in there. And then I think that's it. And then to make it as easy and as frictionless as possible, once you hit the submit button, if you're so inclined, a bunch of links are presented. For example, the link to my LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and so on. I'd love to connect with you, but it's on your terms, right? So if you do the survey and you hit submit, all the links will appear and you can connect with me. I would love to connect with you, but I don't want to force you to give me that information in order to get a download or something like that. So that's why I designed it this way. So please do the survey. I would really appreciate it. I look forward to your feedback. And of course, in a moment or so, we will delve into the Q&A as I'm wrapping up the talk right now. So I wanted to let the conference organizers know that I'm on the last slide. I'm going to hold here for just a few seconds, and then I'm going to close out the video for this presentation and then transition over to the chat functionality for the Q&A aspect of this talk. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you in chat.